Welcome to Boy Meets Quilt. I'm your host, Andrew Vay Hansen, and I'm here with my friend, David.
Hi.
And we're going to talk about creativity, creative process, and whatever else comes up. We'll see. So to start, David, how do you view yourself as a creative person?
That's interesting. So I do think of myself as a creative person. Is that vain to answer that way?
No, I'm assuming like every guest that I bring on here is going to think of themselves as a creative person.
Okay.
So I'm glad that that's the case.
But, so I'm not necessarily what I would consider like a professional creative. Like I'm not a paid by the hour writer or artist or anything like that, but I dabbled in a lot of those things. So I sort of generally think of myself as a low-level creative that dabbles in a lot of different fields.
Okay.
So I've done some things in like visual stuff, like I have a degree in painting and I used to work in graphic design. I've also done stuff with writing where I was a professional copywriter and I worked as an editorial assistant, and I have a lot of hobbies that involve creativity. So yeah, I like creativity. I like to keep myself practicing creativity.
And you went to school. Your degree is
In painting.
in painting.
Yes.
Okay, so you went to an art and design.
I did not paint these.
But so you actually have training
Yes.
as
Yep,
an artist.
I do.
So can you talk about that a little bit?
That's interesting because one of the things that I don't think they did a great job of teaching us in school was necessarily how to be creative or to think creatively. We focused on technical skills, which I think are important. Like,
Right.
with quilting, you actually have to know how to work the machine and do all those kinds of things.
Right.
But in terms of how do you come up with ideas and stuff, we were just sort of expected to do that and then get critiqued and sort of grow in whatever way we would grow out of a critique. But there was never a class or anything that sat down and said, this is a creative process. But actually saying that now, I graduated with a degree in painting a while ago, and then a couple of years ago, as a professional adult no longer in school, I decided to go back and take a painting class. And one of my favorite parts of one of the painting classes that I took was this idea of guided creativity, which is a really interesting exercise.
Can you expand on that?
Sure. So in the first class that I took, it was focused on like trying to do very realistic sort of Renaissance style oil painting.
Okay.
That I painted of a man in a high collar, and that was the first class. And so we were focusing a lot on the skills, the techniques, how to wash your brush, how to apply the paint, all that stuff. And then in the second one, I really loved the instructor, which is why I took the second class, which was about abstract painting,
Okay.
which I wouldn't normally be interested as taking a course as like an adult. In abstract painting, you're like, but why? I want to learn how to paint like realistically in a class, not abstractly.
Right.
But I liked this instructor so much, and it was really interesting. What he did was we took one painting, there was maybe 8 to 10 people in the class, and then he would talk to us about a guided abstraction of an image. So he would say, I want everyone to draw circles around parts of the painting that they think are interesting. Then I want you to draw line segments between those points. And then I want you to cut out those parts and flip them, mirror them, like do these weird manipulations to them, turn them around, and so on, like step after step after step, until at the end everybody had this sort of abstract piece of art that was ultimately painted, that was actually, everybody in the class was drawing upon the same initial image and was using the same broad technique of abstraction. And that actually, wow, I'm having a revelation here now. That actually really stuck with me, because then when I started doing a couple of little paintings on my own after taking these classes, I really did take to heart this idea of that abstraction can be a process, and it isn't just like, oh yeah, the Impressionists had poor eyesight or whatever, and that's why everything looks like that. It's like you actually look at an image.
Pollock just flicked his paintbrush a few times.
Yeah, you actually just think about it, and you're like, how would I take this and flip it around on its head? But I think beyond that, what it really taught me was that you can have great creative results that come from a process period.
Right.
Because I think there's a lot of there's this like mystique that art has, or that creativity and artists have, where I think pop culture depicts creative people as either doing everything effortlessly.
Right.
It's like, oh, you just sit down at a piano and you go and you write a whole song, or it's this thing where you have like a million balled up pieces of paper and it's just frustration and going nowhere, and then the lightning bolt
Yeah,
strikes,
some
and then
epiphany,
all of a sudden
yeah.
it's like this. Because it's not very, it wouldn't be a terribly interesting film. Actually, I think it would be a super interesting film. But if you had somebody who was just sort of incrementally getting better and better,
Right.
which is the way I think actually a lot of creative people in real life work.
Absolutely. No, I agree. I mean, I've had the privilege of sitting in on a lot of art history classes, and you do learn, like, Picasso, like, if you were to go into Picasso's studio, you know, he's doing studies of the same figure over and over and over again before he creates, like, the masterpiece that you see hung in a museum. So I agree, like, process is very important for most creative types. And yeah, those eureka moments do happen, but I know from my own practice, like, it's rare. Like, that's maybe a once in a while thing where I have an idea and I know exactly how to do it and how it's going to turn out, and then I do that and it turns out exactly how I had it in my mind and I'm happy with it. That is, like,
And it's certainly
rare that happens.
And it's certainly not like those are exclusively your best
No,
work.
no, not at all.
Like, you're able to produce great work that comes from practice.
Right. And so I would imagine, I know for myself, most of my friends who are very creative people, most of us are not professionally making money, making a career out of art, what we find fun and creative. And yet, there's still this drive to create. There's still this desire.
It's fun.
Right. So, what do you do now to fulfill that desire?
So yeah, there are a bunch of little things. I think probably right now, honestly, the biggest thing in my life is I play Dungeons and Dragons, which you're aware of. I'm a dungeon master, and for people who don't know what that is, that means that I'm sort of creating the world in which the players are using their characters or playing in. So it's up to me to come up with all of the people in the world who aren't the players, to come up with the setting, to come up with the broad strokes of the narrative, or sometimes the very specific plot elements that happen throughout this story, while the players sort of improvise around what happens. So that's what being a dungeon master is, and it's actually really creative, because it's like writing a screenplay or a novel while working with improvising actors, and you're sort of like, I'm going to create a situation, and maybe they'll want to go to the left, or maybe they'll decide that they're going to go to the right, or maybe they're going to decide they're going to start digging.
Fly up into the sky.
Yeah, or any number of things. You literally can say, like, okay, they're going to meet this man, and he's going to talk to them like this, and they just might decide that they don't want to even talk to him. They want to go talk to that other person. And so you have to make it up on the spot. But there's a lot of preparation that goes into that, of coming up with descriptions of things and settings, and what do these characters look like? What do they have backstories? All that kind of stuff. And it takes a lot sometimes, and sometimes you just make it up off the top of your head, but that's creativity as well.
Absolutely. No, super creative. I would agree. Now, on a somewhat related note, there are miniatures that are involved in most people's Dungeons and Dragons games.
Yes. By miniatures, we mean these little tiny models that we use.
Yes. And those are the characters that you either play or that are the non-player characters, the NPCs, and you paint your miniatures, and you paint them exquisitely. It's hard to see in this setup, but, like, if we were to do a close-up, like, the amount of detail that you put into these characters is pretty impressive.
It's decent. It's not the level, I could point you to some YouTube channels if you really want to see people that are amazing.
All right.
But no, yeah, and it's really fun. I really enjoy it. It is flexing that sort of painting muscle that I hadn't had a chance to use in many years.
Yeah. And so that's something, maybe it's too hard to put into words, but what is the difference of fulfillment you find from painting versus creating characters for Dungeons and Dragons?
I think it's just because, and this is probably, maybe you have similar thoughts about quilting, where it's just something that's very tangible, very concrete. You can finish it and say, look, this is a thing, and it's done.
Yeah.
And people can look at it and touch it and do all those things. Whereas if you're like, oh, I have this amazing story for an idea for my players, and then it doesn't quite, it's never firmly in hand when you're doing the Dungeons and Dragons kind of stuff. But for this, it also is just, sometimes it's really nice to just physically do a task like that. When you're doing something that I think that's more akin to like writing, your brain is, firing on all cylinders the whole time. You're like, what am I going to think of this? When am I going to do this? But for this, there are moments where you can just sort of like, zone out and just really focus on your strokes. And I'm sure like with quilting, there's a lot of that kind of stuff.
Yeah,
There's
I mean,
maybe like almost like a Zen meditative
so
kind of
right,
quality to it.
there totally is. And I have to say, you keep referring to yourself as like low level creative. I don't think of you as low level as all. Maybe you're referring to like you just do a lot of different things.
It's all sort of within arm's reach.
You do them all meticulously and beautifully. Like your level of execution is super high. So just
thank you.
bear
I mean,
that in
I
mind.
try. There's
Yeah.
I gotta say, I try. I don't. It doesn't. None of these things I would say come naturally to me. They're all things that I have to try to do well, but I do try to do them very well.
Speaking of trying, do you ever have trouble pushing through the frustration? Like if you're butting up against an obstacle?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. It depends on. So there are certain times where I've butted up against an obstacle, and that's the last I've seen of that obstacle by obstacle. For example, an area which I don't have a lot of creativity is like music, either technically or just in it. And I tried to learn how to play guitar, and my parents bought me a little Casio keyboard at some point. And I just got after 2 days of frustrating practices, like I'm not getting good at this quickly enough. So I'm gonna go back to the things that I know I can get good at quickly, and that's where. But when I get into those things, some of the creative pursuits that I have now, I do try to challenge myself. I do try to push myself. Like I do a lot of cooking, which is something that I enjoy, and
again, very high level of execution. I've been the recipient.
Well, and like so like I actually make it a point or I have made it for a while now. For like once a week, I'm going to try to attempt something that's maybe something I've never done before, or something that's more ambitious. So for recently, you had my first attempt at macarons, which I had never made before.
Oh my god, and they're so good.
They turned out well. They didn't turn out perfect.
Oh my god.
Ultimately, they're too much effort for me to get perfect.
Right.
But yeah, and it's like and then last week I did sous vide duck breast, and so I'm always trying new techniques, trying all these things, and it's not staying within my comfort zone of what I know I'm good at. It's deliberately trying to choose things that are more complicated and require more steps and require more precision than I'm used to.
What do you think drives you to do that?
Because I want to hold that level of the skill. Like I want to become better, and I want to be able because that way, if I have an idea, I don't want it to be that I'm limited by the mechanical skills that I have, or the muscle memory that I have, or just my own experience. So whether it comes to painting tiny little army figurines or whatever, or baking something or whatever, it's like I want to be able to say, okay, yes, I have tried that and I have done that. So now that I have this idea, I'm not afraid to approach it because I've practiced.
Yeah. Good. I think that's a really good lesson we can all take home with us. But there is something to be said about like recognizing when you're not just ever going to be good at something, and just kind of accepting that, letting it go, and then moving on to the things that you are good at and that you want to get better at.
I'm not going to be an Olympic gymnast. It's just not going to happen for me.
Neither am I.
Even though I've never thought about it until just now. Now is not the time for me to start.
I've always been like, if I were to be an athlete, I should have been a gymnast.
You could do the pommel horse. I could see that. Yeah.
We're both of similar size. Like we're that gymnast.
Sort of short. Yeah.
But no, it never happened, and of course, it will never happen now.
But now we can focus on refining those things that we know that we would want, that number one we want to pursue and that we can pursue well, and focus on creating those successes rather than trying to become a gymnast now.
Although nothing wrong with
just live your dreams.
Yeah.
Live your life.
Doing whatever you want, whatever brings you joy, sparks joy. Am I allowed to say that, or is that trademarked?
Yeah, you'll be demonetized. It's fine.
Any parting thoughts for our audience on YouTube?
Live your life. Be a gymnast.
Why not?
Go for the gold.
Thank you, David, so much.
Thanks,
It's
Andrew.
been a pleasure. I've actually gotten to know some things about you I didn't know before, which I enjoy. One of the reasons I like doing.
I learned that you could be a gymnast.
No, I never said I could be.
I believe you could be. You didn't listen to my lesson.
My lower back right now is telling me that it is too late to try to be a gymnast. So, all right. Thank you, David.
Thank you.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks for watching. If you want to watch more, please click subscribe below and
Is it there?
over here somewhere. And happy crafting, everyone.
Bye.